Hello, my name is Chris Harvey, and I used to be an atheist. I was for a number of years. The reason why I became an atheist, because I was raised Christian, was I saw the evil in the world, and I couldn't believe that the loving God my parents believed in was the same God who was in charge of everything. I saw children starving to death. I saw people get killed, and I grew up on a military base. So my whole world for a number of years was just military, hunting, fighting, killing. That's the culture I was brought up around. And it was also in the height of 9/11. So we were confronted with this evil and with these people who wanted to kill us simply for being who we are. Throughout all of that, I was forced to live in a state of sin and evil and violence and death. I grew up in a culture of death, even if we didn't call it that. Abortion, there's more black babies killed than born. I grew up with mostly black friends. I grew up with mostly single mom households. I was lucky enough to have both my parents, but I was one of two of my friend groups that had both their parents. Divorce was rampant, suffering was rampant. We grew up poor, and my parents eventually got some wealth, so I was able to live in both poverty and comfort in my childhood. And I got to experience the full range of life. And it wasn't until I lost everything, I lost all my friends, I was convinced my family hated me and I hated them. So I was completely alone. And then I decided there's no way that a God could exist. If this is the state the world's in, if this is the state my life is in, how could there possibly be a God? So I got into atheism. That was my emotional response to the problem of evil. What most people don't realize is whenever you become an atheist, or if you're agnostic, or you just don't care, you're apathetic to God, most of the time that is because of an emotional issue, not because of an intellectual issue. Whenever I was going into atheism, I had a variety of emotional reasons to not believe God existed, but absolutely no intellectual reason. So I tried to gain the intellectual reason because I consider myself an intellectual. I was the smartest man in the room, according to my own ego. So I forced myself to learn everything that there could be about the new atheism. This is right whenever the big three, or the big four, depending on how you count them, of the new atheists that became popular and they wrote all their books. And I jumped on that bandwagon. I was like, yeah, evolution's true. The universe is billions of years old, which could still be true, but it still needs a source, which that's a separate video. But we all had this idea of, oh, God doesn't need to exist. Science explains everything perfectly. Why in the world would I need a God to exist when all these parameters, all these scientific equations can explain everything? I don't need a God. Nah. And yet, I was empty. I gained this freedom from God, and yet I didn't have anything. I was alone. I had friends, but I treated them badly because I was a terrible person. I had a family, but I treated them badly because I was a terrible person and believed all the lies that the devil and his minions were telling me. Things like I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't loved, that I had no purpose, that I had no value in this world. So I found ways to cope. Did a lot of really terrible things. And through all of that, I started rationalizing my own sin, my own failures, my own worldview using naturalism. That's the mode I went down. And it wasn't until I actually started studying it at a very deep level, I started going into extreme complexity and fine-tuning of microbiology. And the more I looked into it, the more I was like, this can't possibly be randomly assembled. It was very similar, if you know David Wood, he had an experience in prison where he was looking at the bricks on the wall, and he's like, I would never have believed that the bricks on the wall would have happened by chance. How in the world could I believe that the cells in my body could have happened by chance when they are infinitely more complex than this brick wall? I had a similar experience whenever I was learning about genetics and how DNA recombines with bacteria and all the mechanisms we have to fix DNA whenever it gets destroyed or altered by electrical, chemical, or physical means through like bacteria. Whenever I was learning all that, I had a bunch of experiences that I couldn't quite explain. I was still going down my wave of depravity, getting worse and worse and worse morally, and justifying it, of course, as one does. And yet, I was empty. So whenever I came to realize, okay, there has to be a God, I was still at the state where I hated the idea of the God that my parents loved. So I tried to kill myself. I put a gun in my mouth, and I couldn't pull the trigger. I tried. I squeezed a little hard. And I'm an experienced marksman. And I have shot guns since I was, wee high. Yet, I couldn't kill myself. And then I just cried and cried and cried, fell on the floor, passed out, woke up, put the guns away, went home, put the gun away. It was a Taurus Judge, which is a pretty cool gun. I can shoot buckshot, and it's a pistol. I went home, just angry that I couldn't live, angry that I couldn't die, angry at God, and angry about the whole situation. I was like, okay, well, there is a God, but he doesn't love me. He doesn't care about me. And then my parents forced me, probably by the will of the Holy Spirit, to go to a Christian conference in Michigan. I was from Tennessee. And we went up there for a week. I just tried to pick up girls and distract myself the entire week. And on the fourth night of the 5 nights, they had an altar call for suicide. And I blacked out. And whenever I woke up, I went from where I was in the crowd to at the altar on my hands and knees, crying. And someone was praying over me and delivering me. And since then, I haven't been suicidal again. And I felt this warmth and this electricity flow through my body in a way that it never has. So I was like, okay, well, I can't just ignore this experience and be like, oh, well, it was just like mass hysteria. It was just groupthink. It was just an emotional response to the atmosphere. I try to rationalize it away, but that in combination with all of the research I was doing into abiogenics and all the difficulties with that, like, okay, well, it appears that life is designed. It appears the universe is fine-tuned and designed for life. It appears that there's all this structured complexity, all this order that you would expect disorder in. And the more we learn about it, the more complex it gets. We have all this reason to believe God has to exist materialistically. And I had this experience. So I had everything I needed to be confronted that, yes, there is something, and possibly that something cares about me, because I was no longer suicidal. I had that depression that was gripping me for 10 years. I was suicidal and depressed off and on for 10 years, from the age of 5 to 15. And that is not a great time to be depressed and suicidal. But whenever I was delivered from that, I was like, okay, well, I have to look into this. So I studied scripture, I studied the Quran, I studied just about every major religion I could find. Just going through and trying to find, okay, I don't want it to be Christianity to be true. I want it to be some other religion that's more spiritual, that's has a better PR, especially because at that time, Christianity was being attacked and like, oh, the Inquisitions, the Crusades, all these things are like, Christianity is so evil, it can't possibly be the truth. And yet, as I was going through all these different holy books, like the Quran is the worst book ever written. And really just all the Hindu texts and the Buddhist texts, they're very weird and wild and don't make a lot of sense. There are a lot of contradictions that are just plainly obvious and how people go about it, because all these religions are not monoliths, and Christianity is not a monolith, but it's way more monolithic than Hinduism. Hinduism, there's billions of types of Hindus, because each Hindu is unique. They don't have the same shared belief system. So whenever I was going through all the other religions, just one by one, I was ticking off, okay, for X, Y, Z, these can't have happened the way that they did. So what's the truth? And ultimately, every single time I was looking into it, it led me back to Christianity. So then I was bothered by that. I was like, well, God, you appear to be Yahweh. You appear to be Jesus. Jesus, I can get behind your message. I don't like having to pick up my cross. I don't like having to die to myself and live a sinless life, because I was a porn addict and, I was a manipulator, a liar, a prideful man. I didn't want to submit, and yet I had this calling that I needed to respond to. I didn't want to, but here I am. So as I was going through the different texts, I kept thinking, this is really dumb. the Bible appears to be true, but there's so much in it that I can't get behind. So I started studying the scriptures and trying to find explanations. Well, if God, if you are good, and if you created this world to be good, and humans are the problem, show me how. Explain to me how the Bible could be good when there is genocide and rape and mistreatment of women and minorities and all these mean, evil things. And I was like, God, just show me how this could be possible. And he did. I opened myself up and I received it. And over the last about 10 years now, 13 years, I have learned most of what there is to learn about these topics. So the point of this channel, the point of my ministry, the point of defending a lion in general, is to go through my whole experience from start to finish and explain all these difficult situations, because a lot of these things that I went through, I'm sure you've gone through it as well. I'm sure you've wrestled with some of these problems. And even if you haven't, there's still a lot of really interesting things that I've learned that I want to share with the world. So defending a lion, this ministry, this purpose, is to equip people with the skills, the knowledge, and the ability to both minister to people and to defend your faith from all kinds of attacks. We'll be going over Islam, atheism, materialism, weird cults, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and Catholicism. And we'll be going through why each of those have problems, the problems that they have, how you can demonstrate to those people what the problems are, and how you can defend your faith against that. So hopefully you will be willing to join me on this journey. It's going to be exciting.